Welcome. This is MoneyHeart, where we explore the emotional side of money. I'm Camille Diaz, and today we're discussing risky business. My guest is Patty Nuovo. She has a really remarkable story. After graduating college at St. Mary's College, Notre Dame, she began her career at Shearson American Express and moved to another broker to become the first female registered representative ever hired at her firm in Philadelphia. She excelled in the financial world of the 80s, in the Northeast, where she received her certification as a certified financial planner and grew her practice through seminars and workshops for individuals and businesses. In addition to her position as an investment executive and CFP at Janney Montgomery Scott, she was an adjunct faculty member at, help me out, Patty.
Gloucester County College.
Gloucester County College, thank you. I don't know why that's so hard. Teaching the investments for the College of Financial Planning. Her seminars on concepts of money, investing, retirement planning, estate planning, tax planning, and insurance were an integral part of her overall financial practice. Patty has written 2 ebooks about money and abundance and speaks across the US and Canada as a seminar leader and author of 2 ebooks, Soul Accounting, The Power of Money and Emotions, and Solving the Riddle of the Money Mind in 4 Steps. Patty, welcome to MoneyHeart.
Wow, thank you so much. What a nice introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much. So glad that you provided all that great info for us to share, because this is super fascinating that you were the first woman at first certified financial planner at your company, first woman hired, I guess, stockbroker at that time. And I know you were telling me they didn't think that women could be stockbrokers. So
that's right. Yeah, it was a very interesting time, and it was really an honor to be able to do that. I wasn't aware I was the first woman until I started and found out very quickly that that was the case. And after I had left that company to pursue other things, there were 23 women that were actually there. So it was really proving that women can work with finances and money and be financial advisors and brokers and certified financial planners and all the rest.
Yes, I love that. Blazing the trail. We're all about that over here. So that's perfect. We're talking risky business today. And so we're talking about risk as it relates to investments. Kind of tell us what does risk even mean? What is that?
Well, yeah, that's a great thing. Basically, risk is the uncertainty of loss. I mean, that's the actual definition. And if you can understand that, there are just 2 types. You have pure risk, and that's something that you can insure, for example. And then you have speculative risk, and that's something that's not insurable. So those are basically the 2 definitions, or, you start a foundation and you look for that. And then there are ways that you can actually manage risk.
What an easy way to figure out what type of risk it is. Can I insure it or not? So simple. That's really, really simple. Yeah. So how do we manage risk if we are thinking about doing something that involves risk? How do we manage that?
Sure. Actually, there are a couple of ways, and I'll just briefly explain each. The first is you can share the risk. That can be applied to, like, how, for example, an employee employer benefit situation occurs at work, where an individual gets their own health insurance. That's sharing.
Right.
You can retain risk, and that, in other words, first you have to know that there's an inevitability that there's going to be risk. So in terms of healthcare, it could mean picking a less expensive health insurance plan that has a higher deductible or something like that. So that's what's called retention.
Okay.
Then you can transfer the risk. And that relates, like, just for example, I don't mean to always be using healthcare, but as a perfect example, that the cost of the care is transferred to the insurer from the individual beyond the cost of, like, premiums and deductibles that the person has to pay. Then you can avoid risk For example, not participating in activities that could harm you, like skydiving. And then the last would be reduction of risk. And that's by not, it's using like loss prevention and reduction to minimize losses rather than completely eliminate it. And you know more about that since that's really you as the professional. So it's really all about preventative care.
Yeah, I like that idea of kind of knowing how much risk you want and how much you want to transfer to someone else, avoid all of that kind of thing.
Right.
So tell us how this kind of relates to the market and fluctuations or turbulence in the market. How do we look at that and risk? How do they go together?
Sure. Basically, you have the same types of risks when you're dealing with investments, but they're just called differently. So it might seem like it's something different, but it really isn't.
Okay.
So basically, what you have is a whole bunch, but guess what? There's solutions to every single one that I'm actually going to name.
Oh,
So you've got investment risk. Let me just throw out a couple and I can explain the ones that you think would be worthwhile.
sure.
You've got investment risk, and you've got business risk, and you've got inflation risk, and you have credit risk and timing risk and reinvestment risk. And so there are risks within that, but I don't want you to now become paralyzed and saying, oh my goodness, there's so many risks. Let's just not bother with it. And I say, no, there's a solution to every single one of these and really great solutions for it. So the first one I would say would really be understanding risks, really understanding investments. And I want to break it into two parts.
Okay.
You have all investments are covered under two basic areas. One is ownership and the other one is lending. So ownership, that has created any kind of instruments where it's ownership has created the largest amount of wealth in this country over time.
Okay.
And ownership would be things like real estate and things like stocks. And what is a stock? That's where you become a part owner of a company. And a lot of people say, well, I don't know what company to pick. And I say, where do you shop? Like, what are you buying? What are you doing in your life? What parking lots are full around you? Those are good companies that you might want to be a part owner of. Right. And as a part owner, you also get some of their earnings back as something called dividends. And the other side is lending. And what kind of lending vehicles? Well, it depends on the institution. Lending means that you put money in, you get a specific rate of return, and you get it back at a certain period of time. So depending on where you're lending the money, if you lend money at a bank, that's usually called a CD.
Right.
Certain period of time, certain rate of interest. If you lend money to an insurance company, that could be called an annuity, a fixed annuity. If you lend money to a broker, it could be bills, notes, bonds. And all those terms just mean, each one means how long is it. So, and then there are ways, depending on ownership versus lending, what you can do. How can you minimize some of the risks associated with each? Now, lending instruments are usually considered the safer because you know what your rate of return is, you know when it's coming back to you. So there appears to be no risk, but there are some risks in lending instruments, like credit risk. If you lend money to the US government, you have the full faith and credit of the government behind it. Those are considered much safer than possibly a state, which is a municipal bond, which has some tax benefits, or a corporation, which also could be potentially riskier, but depending on the type of company. So you have what's called credit risk.
Right.
But those are, if you go with the top quality, they call it A-rated, then the risks are very small. But there is one risk that I really want your listeners to know about, and that has to do with inflation and taxes, and then your rate of return. Because that money, which you're going to be taxed on, and you're going to also, like you have the factors that are in there, it will reduce, inflation will reduce the rate of return you have. So inflation right now is running about 1.5%, maybe 2%. But if you have a CD or a fixed annuity or some fixed vehicle or a bond at 2% and inflation's at 2%, you're at zero.
Out. Yep. Yep.
Or you could even be lower. If inflation's at 2% and your money's in a savings account at 0.75, you're below, you're earning less, and that money's also being taxed. So that's what's called an opportunity risk. By being in something so conservative that you are not getting ahead with cost of living and what have you.
Yeah, so, I think it's a really great point, because sometimes we get so nervous about being in something risky that we're like, well, I'm just going to park it over here and leave it where it's safe. But if you haven't really researched all your options in the safe zone, all of those kinds of products, then you may end up in something that, like you said, you're doing worse than zero. Effectively, you're ending up with less money by leaving it there and not having it growing in something that would potentially do better and could probably still give you some safety.
Right. And you know all about that, Camille. I mean, how about maybe a hybrid, something that has the safety of lending and the upside of growth? And if you can combine those two, now you're really helping individuals.
Right.
So now jumping all the way over to the ownership side.
Yes. This was really interesting to me, that concept of, there's the lending, because you're lending someone your money and then they do things with it and promise you some type of return, versus you're owning something, which falls into the real estate and stocks, because you're buying a piece of something and figuring that thing is going to become more valuable, so you'll make a profit.
Right. Now, there are some ownerships that don't do that. For example, everyone knows an automobile. As soon as you drive a new car off the lot, it goes down in value. So not all ownership. So that's why I'm only talking about real estate. Now, the exception to autos, if you have an antique, then many times they will hold their value or even appreciate. So, but generally, if we're talking about real estate and we're talking about stocks, you're the owner. And the largest investment that many people make in their lifetime is their own home.
Right.
So right now, with interest rates being as low as they are, what a phenomenal opportunity to go and borrow money at these historically low rates. And then the difference that you would have usually been paying, you can actually invest it or start saving it or create an emergency reserve. So I remember it wasn't that long ago in the late 70s, early 80s, I know my sister and brother-in-law, they got a mortgage and it was at 16.5%, and it was a steal. Of course, people hear that and they're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh, I remember rates at 12 and that being normal, 12%. So yeah.
So borrowing right now for your home or refinancing if your rate is much higher, phenomenal opportunity to take advantage, to pay as little as possible for your appreciating asset. So then on the stock side, that's where there obviously are all types of risks, but there are two concepts that if you keep in mind, you have what's called a business cycle, which is also like a market cycle. You have your peak, your decline, your trough, and then your increase, so you have, it's like a reverse, or a bell curve. So where are we at right now? So if you look at business cycles, even companies, they have business cycles. Even real estate has a 7-year and a 25-year cycle. So everything has cycles, but again, what is the time you have? If it's long term, you'll weather the cycles that are out there, so you don't have to be as concerned. But if you tell me I have money and I need it in 4 years, ownership vehicles are not a good choice for you. The lending side would be much safer. I have a CD coming due in 2 years, so it's going to be there. Or a money market fund or things like that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And sometimes people want to get they think, well, I only have 4 years, so I'm going to put it in something on the ownership side because it's going to make me the biggest return in my 4 years. But I think they kind of forget about that piece. Yeah, but there's a cycle. And what if you happen to hit your 4 years hits on a low part of that cycle? They just kind of didn't think about that piece. Versus, like you said, if you go on the lending piece, do something that's what the return's going to be, or at least you won't lose money, then you're in a better shape if you have that short period of time.
Yeah, because I want your listeners to know something that's, I think, really critically important. A lot of people will talk to you about liquidity. You got to have liquidity if it's short-term, liquid.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing is you also have to use a term called marketability, meaning what is going to be the value when you need it.
Yeah.
So like stocks are liquid. You can buy and sell them every second. So that's incredibly liquid.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't promise you what the price is going to be.
Right.
So marketability, there's a risk. It's a marketability risk to know what that is. So yes, I know so many people say, oh, I just got this inheritance. It's $5,000 and I want to, invest it. And the first thing I'll say is, do you have an emergency reserve? And they're like, no. I said, okay, we got to start that first. Well, what stock can I buy? I said, no. Emergency has to be marketable and liquid, and basically your money market account or a CD or like something really short term, something like the word says, emergency. I mean, your transmission can fall out of your car in a moment, and
it can.
Unfortunately, there's not a good return, but it has to be there for you. And I can guarantee you when you need it, the market would be down. I mean, I've seen that.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, more times than not. So here's where you can a solution to that thing, not put all of your eggs in one basket. You could have a little bit that might be more on the ownership side. You might have, but the majority would be in the lending side, which would be liquid and marketable. So that's those are the only options that you can have. But there's you build a foundation, and from the foundation, then you keep moving up from there. But there are other things you do even before you start investing.
Right. So let's talk about those, because whenever I meet with a client or a potential client and they say, yeah, I want to start putting in $500 a month, into something. And I do work on that lending side. So I know that they're guaranteed they're not going to lose money. It's a little more of the safety thing, but they're going to get a decent return. And they say they want to do it. One of my very first questions is also, do you have an emergency fund? How long can you survive on said emergency fund? And sometimes I get the answer, I have $300 in my checking account. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's not enough. Because most emergencies are more than $300, and I'm guessing you do the same thing. What's your formula for figuring out how much an emergency fund should be?
Okay, now it's time for me to put on my CFP hat.
That's right. Yes. Certified financial planner hat on. Here's what we need. Yes.
So basically what you want is, rule of thumb, it's about 9 to 12 months of money, of living expenses you need in your emergency fund. Right. Why? Basically, what we have found is that it can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months if you lose your job, if you get furloughed, if, here are all the ifs. That's how long it's going to take you to find something else, because you have the interviewing process, you have the hiring, the onboarding process, and typically 6 to 9 months. And so you need enough money to pay all your bills, your car expense, your utilities. If you have a mortgage, you need to have that, so that money can be there to be used, so that you're not being evicted while you're trying to find a job. So
it's hard to go on a job interview when you can't shower first and you don't, you're living out of your car. It's pretty rough. So yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think if somebody is self-employed, then they need even more, because they're probably not going out to find a job there, and their job may disappear if they get really sick, if they get really injured, if the market shifts and clients suddenly dry up. Yeah.
And a lot of people, you have to look at it this way. It's having those savings, it's a great buffer. It is something you can sleep at night knowing it's there. Because a lot of people are like, oh, but it's so much money, not earning a lot. But you need to have it. So it's not like you're losing, because the emergency trumps being able to earn more. But that's the foundation. You have that, and then it's onward and upward from there.
Yes, 100% agree. You've got to have that emergency fund because stuff happens. Stuff just happens and it always will. And if you're prepared and can handle it, then you just get through it and move on versus if it's wrecking the entire rest of your financial plan because now you're having to put too much on credit cards and borrow from your retirement savings to survive and all this kind of stuff that we don't want to do. Tell us the other steps. Go ahead and then tell us the other steps.
Dealing with the emergency reserve, there is something I find is really an interesting little nugget that I wanted to throw out there.
Yeah.
And that is with the money, I've been suggesting to some people to open a Roth IRA and use that as their emergency reserve. And so people say, well, but I'm locking it in. Actually, no, you're not. When you open up a Roth, the money that goes in, it's after tax dollars. So you don't get a deduction. It's just money in. And you're only allowed to put in $6,000 a year, or if you're 50 or older, you can put in $7,000 a year. But the brilliance of the Roth is you can pull your original contribution out at any time. So if you put in that $6,000, if there's an emergency, you can pull it right out. And what's so great, what the caveat is, anything that it earns, that has to stay in there for at least 5 years.
5 years, right.
Just the earnings, not the original contribution. And then after you're 59 and a half, you don't have to worry about that. And you could pull it out at any time, the earnings and the contribution. So it's a way to not be taxed on that money while it's growing. Because certainly getting a low interest rate, why also be taxed on it? And it's a great way to just force you to save, because the one thing that I really feel, again, looking through history, is that our tax rates over time will be going up, just like the lending rates are going to go up. Are they going to go skyrocket? No, it's not going to be like that, but we're at a historical low. We're not going lower. So the only place to go from here is up. So that in the future, when tax rates are higher, to be able to pull money out tax-free at any time will really be a benefit to you, especially come time for retirement, when you'll be taxed on Social Security, you'll be taxed on your 401k plans and your pension plans, but the Roth, never. So you build that one up and that comes out tax-free in perpetuity. So I think that's a great way to kind of get around something that can really work.
Yeah, that's really clever. I mean, having a little bit in your bank account just so you can pay something if it's a small emergency, but growing a big fund inside of a Roth is a great idea because you can access that. If you really had the big emergency, the one where you're out of work for 6 months or something like that.
But even if you have a Roth at the bank or at the broker, you can say, send me X, and within a few days, it's in your
It would be there, right.
So if nothing's locked in, it stays liquid because what you're investing it in is liquid also.
It's liquid, right. Yeah, very cool. Give us what other solutions you've got. Actually, no, wait, we had to go back to the basic. What else? Because I know you sent me these 4 things that you've got to have in place as part of your foundation. And I 100% agree. So let's make sure we.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So now a lot of people would say, like, why do I need these things? What are you talking about? They're actually, it's what I call, there are 4 documents that I think are critical to keep risk at bay for an individual. And so the 4 are to have a will, to have a living revocable trust, to have a financial power of attorney, and to have an advanced directive and durable power of attorney for healthcare. And I can just very briefly go into them and why they're just so important.
Yeah, let's go into why you have to have these things.
Right. And again, we're still talking about risky business, and this is about the risks in your life and how these can prevent that from happening and cost you a lot of money. So the first has to do with a will. And basically, it's just a piece of paper that tells when you die, that tells the beneficiaries who's going to get what. But the problem is, if you don't have one, the state decides who gets what.
Yes.
You don't get to decide.
Exactly.
And you don't really want that. And that's basically all there is to the will.
There's very few people that I know that are like, yeah, sure, just let the state make my decisions for me. I love when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Said no one ever, right?
Exactly. So the second one would be that living revocable trust. And a lot of people, they hear the word trust and they're like, oh, but a good estate attorney, or they call an elder attorney, they will walk you through this. It's basically, it's a flat fee for these documents. Right. Some of them you can even download online, get yourself notarized, and you don't need an attorney. But I really would suggest an attorney, just because they make sure everything is perfectly set for you.
Yeah.
But it's a living document, which means you can change it. And as your life changes, you need to change it.
Right.
So the second is the living revocable trust.
And when we did ours, because I want to make a plug here for definitely hiring a good attorney, she helped walk us through some things we hadn't thought about. You know, okay, well, what happens if you both get hit by a bus tomorrow and your kids aren't old enough to receive their benefits, and so you've got someone picked out for them, but do you want, you know, however much you've got in life insurance to suddenly land in their laps when they're 18? And I'm like, oh no, I do not need to make my child a millionaire and give them access to all of it at 18. That probably wouldn't be the best choice for them. So these things that we hadn't thought about, she brought up and walked us through, how do you want this to happen? Because in a trust, you get to dictate from the grave exactly what you want to have happen.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Right. So that to me is important. So the trust, not only do your assets pass within 2 weeks to the beneficiaries that you've named, right. Yes. But it also, you do it free of probate, which means you don't have costs. Mm-hmm. So, and you also want to add what's called an incapacity clause, because if you don't die, it can be even worse, because you can't sign for things. And you can't make decisions. So you need someone to be able to make those decisions. And your attorney, they'll go over all that with you. They'll come up with that and have it all set. So let me give you an example why this is important. Sure. Say you own a home in joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, which a lot of people do. This means that if either of you were to die, the other would simply take over the title of the house with no probate.
Right.
You also have a will saying who's going to get what stuff in the house and who will be the guardian of the kids. Mm-hmm. So you think you've done everything and you feel secure. But what if the virus hits and you become incapacitated? So it's the incapacitated, which is the bigger problem. Right. If you don't have this set up. Like, for example, your spouse lost your job, you can't work. Your spouse realizes that there's no way you'll be able to afford a house. And so you're going to decide to sell it. So can you sell the house? If one of you is incapacitated, the answer is no.
Because you both own it, so you both have to agree and sign off.
That's right, to sell. Mm-hmm. And so without the revocable trust with the incapacity clause, you have to go to the court and pay $5,000. And the court will then be the designated signee for your spouse who is incapacitated.
Oh, wow.
And from that point on, they will oversee every penny of your money. And they'll be in control of it with you until the person either gets better or eventually passes. Mm-hmm. So if you had just had that, the trust with that clause, you could sign for your spouse could sign for you.
Right.
No charge, no cost, no one involved.
Right. And when somebody is incapacitated due to a medical illness or an injury or something like this, you don't really want to be tossing $5,000 out the window. You know, you probably need that money for some other things. And just handing it to the court so you can have the ability to make good financial decisions, maybe not our favorite choice if we don't have to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So then now the third one has to do with the financial power of attorney. Mm-hmm. And that is really having to come into play because you have assets like a 401k or an IRA, or hopefully a Roth IRA.
Or both. Yeah.
Right. And so bank accounts, brokerage accounts. So in the event that you need help managing those accounts while you're alive, but say you're sick at the moment, then you have the power of attorney, which will step in and that you appoint to be able to sign the checks, to be able to say, please sell this, do that, basically act as you for that. Exactly. So, and then the fourth and final has to do with the advanced directive and durable power of attorney for healthcare. And that is, especially where we've just had with the pandemic, really came to the fore. In this unprecedented time, you really need to, have this one. And that's in case you become sick, somebody can actually sign and do the same thing for you. For like any decisions, do not resuscitate. I mean, all different directives, for that.
And it removes so much hassle, because if you get more than one family member involved and they don't think the same thing should happen, then if you've got it written down who's in charge, they make the decision and it's done. And if you don't have that scripted beforehand, then it becomes a battle of your people, all the people that care about you, fighting in the hospital over what decision we make to do for you, or what happens to the money, or if we pay for this procedure or not. And what a nightmare. It's putting your kids through that, or your sister or brother through that, or, your parents through that if you're young, all kinds of stuff. That would be it's really hard. So much easier if you've got it laid out ahead of time. You open up the document. Well, I guess that's what they wanted to have happen, and then you can just do what's written there and not have to worry about it. So everybody's all emotional and struggling, and that's not a great time to make quality decisions.
It's actually the worst time to make a decision.
Yeah,
because the emotions can absolutely sabotage your best laid plans.
Right.
Especially when it comes to the market. I mean, how many times you'll hear on the news, the market's down, and people will think, oh my goodness, I better get out. I'm going to lose all my money. And then they see the market's up and they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. Let's buy more. And I just want your listeners to know one important thing. The majority of the money is made when stocks are going down. And why do I say that? Because when it's going down, you're buying it at a lower cost. So that's one of the tips. Do not be worried. My clients, I have taught them well, when there is a large drop in the market, the first thing they'll do in the morning, they'll be calling me, and people say, oh my gosh, your people are probably so nervous. I'm like, no, they're calling and saying, is it a good time to buy? Should we buy more? That's the correct way to look at it. Because basically when things are going up, unless you sell it, you don't have any money. When things are going down, you're buying more, and you're doing what's called dollar cost averaging, which is, these are some of the ways to minimize risk when you're in ownership kind of vehicles. And that's where you periodically put money in without the emotion, every month or every quarter or every year, like clockwork, whether it's up or down, for long-term investing.
Right.
You will average a better cost, because not everybody times the market. You don't know when the bottom is. You don't know when the top is. I don't really care. I just know that I look at history, and over the long term, you've got the best situation. And what's so interesting is that the time period, like from 1972 to 99, the market went from the Dow at 100 to go to 1,000, and then from 1,000 to 10,000. And that was the first one was, like 30 years. And then the next time it was only 15 years. And then the next double was 5 years. And then the last double was 3 years. Wow. So the pattern is that the upswings are going more and more. And the long history, if you look at the market from, say, the 1900s to today, it's definitely a staircase, but it's on the upside. But at any time, it does go down, but always going in an upward trend. And there's a whole lot of factors, having that in mind. So dollar cost averaging is definitely one way to minimize risk. And guess what, Camille? everybody who has like a 401k plan, that's a contributory plan where they can put money in,
Yeah.
their paycheck, every paycheck, a certain percentage or a dollar amount goes in every paycheck. And then they wonder why after 20 years they have so much money in the account, because they didn't time the market. They didn't get out when it was down. They didn't sell when it was up. They just stayed the course and they just kept at it and at it and at it.
Yes. Yeah. So I always tell people the same thing is, that habit of saving is going to do more for you than the actual amount that you're saving. So rather than stressing over, I can't put enough, let's get something going, even if it's small, because doing that for many years will make such a big difference versus, well, I only have 5 years to go. What can I do? Well, hit lotto, it's like there's not a lot of options there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really like that. Being consistent and habit of saving, having all of your emergency and safety stuff in place so that you're going to be covered, and then really watching and having that advanced plan of your timeline, knowing when you're getting towards that point of, okay, I can't have next year be the down year or 5 years from now be the down cycle, because that's when I need it. So I'm going to start shifting, what I'm doing, from the ownership to the lending option or something like that. I love that. Super, super helpful. Thank you.
Sure. A couple of other ways to minimize risk, some ideas, is certainly with a company plan. If the company is going to match a contribution you have, you want to maximize to the match, because that's free money.
Right.
You don't want to leave that on the table. The company is giving it to you. Take advantage of that and at least do that. I had my assistant who worked with me, even though she was making minimum wage at the time, I said, just do 1%, just one.
Yeah, something.
And she found out that when she did that, because she paid less tax, because she's not being taxed on as much money, either you can pay the government in taxes or you can put the money in for yourself. So basically, why not pay yourself rather than pay the government? So she did 1%. And after 10 years, she had enough money to put a down payment on her first home.
Oh, how
Because
cool.
Just consistent, just doing it and doing it and doing it. And it was being matched. So it wasn't 1%, it was 2%.
Right.
And then she went to 2% and she got 4%. So in other words, like it was so tremendous, just the little bit that she did. And the paycheck she got, I think it was a $15 difference between putting the 1% in versus not doing anything at all. She didn't even feel it.
Not
said,
even,
that's like,
not even
that's
a big
one
deal.
night.
Yeah.
One movie.
Right.
And a drink.
Yeah. Can we talk about your books just a little bit?
Sure, absolutely.
So go ahead. You've got The Power of Soul Accounting, SOUL, The Power of Money and Emotion.
Basically, what I came up with, which was interesting, is that I saw that people, their emotions were really very involved in their ability to succeed or fail when it had to do with investing. And so I looked at basically how people acted. And basically, there were two major emotions that would sabotage a person, and that was the fear and the greed factor. And what that was all about was more people would be more upset if they got out and took a profit than if it went higher. They'd be more upset if that happened than if they had the stock and it went down and they lost. And to me, that didn't make any sense, because I'm like, losing is a bad thing. And they're like, but if I miss that upward, that's worse than taking a loss. Yeah. So that got me thinking of how emotions really start playing into it. And so I did research on it and started talking about it, and saw that women handle money very differently than men do. And there's historical context for that. I mean, it wasn't that long ago women couldn't own property and couldn't even have their own accounts and things like that. So it wasn't like, like last century. It was within a certain period of time. Like we've just gotten the right to vote within the past century. So, I mean, interesting where we're at. So I wrote a whole book about that, looking at the historical context of all the different ideas about how people think about money. And because People, they're influenced from their family, they're influenced from their religious upbringing. Like in the Bible, for example, there are 365 references about money, even in the good book.
That's a lot of money references for one book. That's
Right.
not technically a book about money.
Right. And then you have society. So you have all these factors that are almost all of them are very conflicting messages. And so being able to pull that apart and understanding what that is, it gets money out of your head and put it in your pocket where it belongs.
Yes, I like that.
So the second book was the actual how to. How can you actually make that occur? What do you need to do? What are the steps necessary? I broke it into 4 steps. And awareness obviously is the first step, to know that there might be something in the way. Like if I say, you know, Camille, when you hear the word money, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And you'd be amazed at the words that people come up with, like fear, success, intelligence, greed, bad, evil. It's like it runs the whole gamut. So to understand where are you, because basically money is just a tool. The concept is abundance. That's the concept. But money's the tool to get you to where you want to go. But people, then why do you have things like fear? Like, are you afraid of a hammer or a pair of pliers? You know, it's a tool.
Yeah.
So that's what the books are really about, is exploring it and helping people overcome it and empower themselves so they can really be in charge of their finances.
I think that's so much fun, and I'm so glad you have these resources available, because that concept of people being angry that they got out and it went up a little bit more, and feeling that need, like I missed all the potential up, more so than being frustrated, you know, than being grateful that, oh gosh, I got out and it went up a little bit more, but then it went way down and I didn't have to do the down. Just so interesting that people
it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. You'd think they'd be more upset about the loss, but they're actually more upset about the perceived loss of the small up, rather than they are the actual loss of when they lose.
Right.
Yeah. Super interesting. This has been great. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Patty has moved back to Northwest Arkansas from California, where she now works for Raymond James as an investment advisor for Signature Private Wealth Management at Signature Bank of Arkansas in Bentonville. She's available for speaking engagements and can be reached at the Private Wealth Management Office with Raymond James at Signature Bank in Bentonville. You can also reach her via email at patricia.nuovo, that's Nuovo, at raymondjames.com, or by calling her office line at 479-715-6940. Her books, Soul Accounting, The Power of Money and Emotions, and Solving the Riddle of the Money Mind in 4 Steps, are both available on Amazon. Thank you as well to our listeners and viewers. I'm your host, Camille Diaz. This show is sponsored by Serenity Financial, a 5 Rings financial agency specializing in financial education, life insurance with living benefits, and guaranteed lifetime income. Be sure to follow MoneyHeart on social media at MoneyHeart Show and on our website, MoneyHeartShow.com. Patty has a money mantra that she says regularly. Tell us about your money mantra, Patty.
Another day, another dollar.
I love it. Thank you.